Members of KC Tenants, an anti-eviction group based in Kansas City, have organized various protests to protect those facing eviction during the freezing winter months in Missouri. The most recent protests, which included protesters interrupting an online courtroom, result in the delay of more than 800 evictions in Missouri's Jackson County.
Here to discuss, Associate Professor of Sociology, University of Missouri, Kansas City, Michelle Smirnova. She's here. Now, Michelle, tell us a little bit about the work that you guys are doing down there. Why, I was under the impression there is a national eviction moratorium. How is this even happening today? Just go into all of that for us.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm a sociologist who studies grassroots organizing and social movements. So I'm not personally a member of KC Tenants, but I have been studying and engaging with them since their early days in spring of 2019. But yeah, the CDC has passed an eviction moratorium, which should have prohibited evictions. But while it was very broad legislation, it was only on the it only prohibited evictions on the non-payment of rent. So it still allowed for evictions for other reasons. It also only applied to HUD-supported housing units. So it was up to local and state jurisdictions whether or not to extend that moratorium to cover other sorts of housing units. And particularly in Kansas City, which is under Jackson County, the Jackson County court system did not extend it to cover all evictions. So that's part of the reason why you hear about evictions continuing in many parts of the country, including Kansas City, in that despite this eviction moratorium, which sounds like it should be a pretty good protection, and while there have been some decline in evictions, these evictions continue to happen.
Yeah.
Talk to us about some of the actions that KC Tenants have taken, whether those actions have ramped up and whether they've been effective.
So KC Tenants, I've been following them since early 2019, and partially the reason I became interested in them is because housing insecurity is not a new issue. But they were sort of gaining traction and attention amongst many more people than I'd seen with other similar movements. And I had previously worked at the Census Bureau, and one of the issues that the census encounters is that we undercount homeless populations. And part of the reason for that is many people don't identify as homeless. The term homeless evokes or connotes this image of someone living in a tent city on the street, as opposed to crashing on a friend's couch. And so I think what particularly interested me about KC Tenants was how they were framing this as about tenants, which many people do identify as. And so they were able to really connect with people experiencing housing insecurity, and particularly housing insecurity is an intersectional issue that disproportionately impacts people of color, Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities, transgender communities, et cetera. So I became interested in them for this reason, because they were able to gain all this traction. And so they've been engaged in a lot of direct actions for the past 2 years. Leading up to, in Kansas City, we had a pretty contentious mayoral and city council election, and they really pushed for housing to be considered a political issue. And the same, they then received sort of national attention from really big names like AOC and Bernie Sanders. And so some of them actually discussed how they had experienced housing insecurity as sort of this personal issue, and that they experienced a lot of shame that they didn't realize there were these resources for them, because this was one of a personal failing. I'm not able to make my rent. And so I thought there was a really interesting parallel here to, for example, domestic violence that historically had been treated as a personal issue, that the state shouldn't get involved, that this is between two individuals. And I think similarly, housing insecurity, many people experience as this is a personal issue, that I'm not able to make my rent, therefore I am individually responsible, as opposed to seeing this as a public issue and something that many people are experiencing, that in 2019, for example, a full-time worker earning minimum wage in any county in the United States couldn't afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And that I think more than half of all Americans spend more than 30% of their income on rent. So that housing insecurity is a really widespread issue, and it disproportionately impacts already marginalized communities. And so KC Tenants, I think, was really able to bring this to attention. And so they've done this in the form of filing petitions with landlords, suing landlords for providing uninhabitable conditions. Most recently, what has received a lot of attention is disrupting eviction court. So either when it's being held virtually, calling, inundating the court with either phone calls or logging in. When it was being held in person, chaining themselves to the courthouse, and really calling out that eviction is violence. And right now you're calling me, we've been having rolling blackouts in the Midwest because it's negative 14 degrees this morning. And it's been over 10 days of under 10 degrees. So if you're throwing a family out onto the street, then it's violence. It's, I think in addition to disrupting someone's entire life, that where can they go, especially during the pandemic, shelters.
Well, and that's it, Michelle, is even if you don't care, like even if you're a totally heartless person, totally cold-blooded, good luck to that family on the street in minus 14-degree weather. We saw the statistics we covered here on this show that in cities that did not have that eviction moratorium, they had higher infection rates of coronavirus and they had higher death rates. So this isn't in any respect just a, bootstraps, you're on your own, one person, their problem type of an issue. This is a societal issue that has impacts on everyone.
Absolutely. And I think that's what KC Tenants has been drawing our attention to, that we treat eviction as it's just something that happens. And we don't really interrogate the apparatus, and that taxpayer dollars go into evicting people, that we pay for people to remove people forcibly from their homes, for the trials, and then paying for the shelters, for where the family needs to go. But yeah, the societal cost now we're seeing with COVID-19, that, okay, well now we need to pay for people's care, and that it's going to spread the virus to more people and entire cities. So that I think sometimes we treat these issues as, this is just this person's issue over here, and we don't realize how we're implicated in it and how we also are paying for it. So in some ways there's actually a financial incentive to keep people. There's a huge that we can talk about the educational ramifications for children. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's just thank you for explaining it so well, Michelle, and explaining how terrible the situation is that's happening there. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we'll have more Rising for you after this.